Good morning, or depending on when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokemon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCGRadio in this, which I believe is our 99th episode. So, starting off right at the beginning today, I ask you for help for my 100th episode. Now, it is my 100th episode. I think I'm supposed to do something a little bit fancy. I'm not entirely sure what I'm supposed to be doing, to be perfectly honest with you, but, there we go. I am going to try and get some interviews with people over Skype, which I know I said I'd never do, but, needs must and all that, over the next week, but I make no promises. What I want from you guys is questions. If there's anything you've been wanting to know about my opinion on Pokemon, etc., a particular deck, how I got started, past successes, failures, anything along those lines, do let me know, ladies and gentlemen. Give me your questions at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or just tweet me at the Wassy. Or if you're listening to this on YouTube or SoundCloud or WordPress, just pop a little comment down below. Ask me your questions, ladies and gentlemen. If you don't ask me questions, I can't answer them, and that's going to be it means I'm not going to have so much to do for the 100th show. Now, I know I'm actually not giving a huge amount of notice, but if you are listening to this in the next week, get in touch. Let me know what you want to know. The other thing to point out this week is that in honour of coming up to my 100th show, I've decided to start again properly with the YouTube channel. Now, it had been a little bit of time since I posted any new videos, but I am reversing that trend. I've put up 2 PTCGO videos with Pyroar, one against Plasma, one against Frostlass Articuno. I've put up last week's podcast. I've also put up 4 games with TDK, one against Empoleon Miltank, one against Greninja Miltank, and 2 against Yveltal. One where I just absolutely destroyed it, just to show how quickly TDK can beat it, and one longer proper game. I've been trumpeting TDK for a little while now, so I think it is only fair that I start putting some games up to show you how good I think it is. Now, I have got 2 more TDK games that are going to be going up in the near future, one against Big Basics and one against Virgin, and I think it's important to, try and show as many different games with a deck as I can, because by doing that, I'm going to be able to show you more about the particular deck. The other thing I've put up is a deck breakdown. Now, this is a 20-minute discussion of my deck, what cards I'm playing, in what proportions, and why. Now, I've got a lot of good feedback from the YouTube channel. I haven't got quite as many views, etc., as I would like over the last kind of week since I've been doing this. It's growing quite steadily. I did hit over 100 views on one day, which isn't amazing, but for starting it up again is pretty good. But I ask for your help in this. So, as well as sending me your questions, go over to YouTube. You can go to youtube.com/user/PTCGRadio, or just Google PTCGRadio YouTube and you'll find it nice simply. But do support that, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not always going to be able to put up videos with quite the regularity that I have been this past week, but I will certainly keep putting videos up if you guys keep watching them, and try and get some others into the cause. Subscribe on YouTube, you know the deal by now. Watch them, like them, subscribe. Now, I have got some more plans for YouTube. I'm going to be, hopefully, when I go to tournaments in the future, recording live games and commentating on them, which is something I was never able to do before, but I feel more confident it will be happening in future. And I've got a couple slightly more out there projects, not involving PTCGO or indeed gameplay at all, which I'm going to be working on and seeing if I can get back to you over the summer with that. So I have not forgotten, ladies and gentlemen, about the YouTube channel. It is back up and running. Watch the videos, like them, subscribe to the channel, and if people keep watching it, I'll keep making those videos. And please send me your questions for next week. Anything you've been wanting to ask me now. So, that's my YouTube channel. This week, there isn't really any news, but we have had a complete leakage of the... That's not a good phrase, it's a complete leakage, but never mind. We have had all of the Rising Fist cards spoiled from Japan, so I'm going to do my first look. Now, when I do these set reviews, I tend to do them in 2 halves. The first thing that I do is go through with the Japanese scans, and I give you my first impression. That's what I'm doing today. I've not gone looking at other people's opinions on Facebook and etc. I've not seen any articles, although it's a bit early for people to be writing them just yet. This is my first look. I may make some mistakes, I might miss something. For instance, with Flashfire, I never even noticed how good Lopunny could be with Weavile. And given that a very good friend of mine made top 32 at the ECC with Weavile, I should have noticed that. And then, when the cards come out properly in the UK and the US, then I'll do my proper look with hindsight, by which point there will be multiple articles online by distinguished writers that I can have a look at, and I will be adding that into my discussion. But for today, you get my first look. Now, I know there have been other international nationals going on. I'm going to deal with that next week. Today is purely about Rising Fist. So, starting off with grass, we see Victory Bell, and this kind of reminds me a little bit of the Amoonguss that people play with Ninetales. Ninetales, of course, has the attack that does a bunch more damage for every special condition, and Amoonguss has been one of the things which people have been using. Rhys Williams in the UK has had a number of half-decent finishes, including a decent finish at UK Nationals using such a deck. But, quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, Victory Bell, it's just not that impressive when you look at it. So we have a look at Victory Bell. Its ability allows you to do a bunch of damage, no damage at all. It allows you to attach a grass energy and discard it, and then your opponent's active Pokemon will be poisoned and confused, which means we can start building up damage moderately quickly. However, it's a stage 2 rather than the stage 1 Amoonguss, and it's really not practical. The other thing is you may end up giving up your energy, well, you will end up giving your energy attachment for the turn, which is not always a big deal, but it can be a big deal. I know Ninetales only takes 1 energy to attack, but even so, that's a bit of a pain in the neck. Now, you could potentially run this in something like Virizion Genesect, but they really need the energy on the field. And to be honest with you, special conditions don't play that big a part. There's a lovely trainer we're going to get to in a minute, which knocks them all off, not to mention the prevalence of Virizion, and we've still got Slurpluff in the format for fairy Pokemon. So, truth be told, it's interesting, and I don't think... It's one of these cards, like a lot of the ones in this set and previous sets, which have the potential to be good. You're just waiting for a new set of cards or somebody to do something very creative with them. We then come to our first EX in the set, Heracross EX. Truth be told, I don't like Heracross EX. It's got 2 attacks. One does 40 damage for a grass and a colourless, and then your opponent's attacks do 20 less damage the following turn. If I'm going to have 2 energy on a grass EX, I'm going to put 2 energy on Virizion, and I'm going to Emerald Slash, because it actually does more damage and attaches energy to the bench. Its second attack is Giga Power for 80 damage. You can do 40 more damage, and if you do, it does 22 itself. But again, if I'm going to get free energy onto a grass Pokemon EX, I'm going to put it on Genesect and do 120 Snipe, or I'm going to G-Booster. Plus, Genesect, of course, is a Plasma Pokemon, so you're able to use Colress Machine to attach a Plasma energy to get it going in 2 turns rather than 3. I'm afraid Heracross EX, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't meet. Look, it's just not good enough. Mega Heracross EX can be good. It's got 1 attack for 2 grass and a colourless, and it does 180 damage, but 10 less for every damage counter on Heracross, or Mega Heracross EX. Now, I said before how this has got 220 damage, and that means it's in 1-hit KO range of Pyroar. I also said that if the attack did kind of 200, 220 damage, that would be good. What this means is, if it's completely clean, then it's going to get 1-hit KOs on anything. If it's not, then it's not. Something like a Landorus or a Kyurem or a Darkrai hitting for 30 on the bench takes it out of 1-hit KO range unless you stick on laser, Muscle Band or play a laser or something like that. It's still good, but I don't like these cards that get progressively weaker as they get damaged. It just seems like it's not going to be doing a huge amount of damage for a huge amount of the game. So, and again, if I'm going to put free energy on an EX in order to get a 1-hit KO, I'm going to go for Genesect. Yeah, you have to discard the energy, but I still think it's better. Not to mention the fact that it's a Mega Pokemon EX, so of course, you have to waste a turn Mega Evolving it. I just don't think it's up to scratch. And lastly, in grass, we've got Excelgor. Now, it's got a moderately nifty attack. It's a stage 1, 90 HP. For 1 energy, it can do 60 damage if it evolved that turn, but then it goes down to 20, and it's not that great. Now what you can do on your second turn with Excelgor, you can attach another energy. For a grass and a colourless, its second attack does 40 damage, and it reads, during your opponent's next turn, when this Pokemon receives damage from an attack, flip a coin. If heads, this Pokemon receives no damage. So, it's got potential. I could see people doing something with this. I can see it as a one-off tech if people are playing Excelgor anyway, but it's just a little bit underpowered, it's a little bit weak, its HP is a little bit low. I'd love to see it working, but I'm not 100% convinced it's ever really going to. Now, strangely in this set, we have a little team-up between Magmortar and Electivire. If you look at their cards, the artwork is lovely, and on the Magmortar card we see Electivire. And it has 2 attacks. First attack, Nitro Charge, 30 damage, choose 1 fire energy from your deck and attach it to this Pokemon. Now, attaching from the deck is always good, but as has become a little bit of a theme on this podcast, I am forced to mention that Yveltal does more damage depending on how much energy you've got attached to your Pokemon. What you don't want to be doing, and I said this with Charizard in Flashfire, the bad EX, I think it's called Stoke or something, the attack. You don't want to be piling energy on and then passing the turn, because Yveltal will have a field day. Now, its second attack is actually potentially good, if a little bit expensive. For 4 energy, a fire and 3 colourless, 80 damage. If you have Electivire on your bench, it does 80 more damage. That's 160. Put a muscle band on that, and you're one-hit KOing EXs. Now, it is only a stage 1. And let's not forget that you generally need to put 4 energy on a Rayquaza EX to one-hit KO an EX Pokemon. And discard 3 of them this. You don't have to discard 3 of them. And it's a stage 1, not an EX, so it doesn't give up 2 prizes. And it doesn't have an annoying weakness to Drunigan, which counts it very easily. Could Emboar Magmortar be a thing? Probably not. You'd have to add muscle bands into your deck, and Rayball, or Emboar I should say, doesn't have that much space anyway. And you're going from a basic attacker to a stage 1 attacker. I love the idea, but you have to put Electivires in your deck, and you have to put a stage 1 line to go with your stage 2 Emboar, and probably your stage 2, what's it called? Delphox, there we go, I should remember that one really. And to be honest, time you put 4 energy onto a Delphox, it's doing 130 damage anyway. Put a muscle band on, it's doing 150. You only have to put 5 energy on a Delphox to one-hit KO most EXs, 6 to one-hit KO any. And you don't have to have a basic on the bench and add in an extra stage 1 line. So as much as I love Magmortar and it's kind of funky, I think this is more... This is really more of a cool little novelty than something which is really going to make waves in the game. I would love it to be good, but I just don't think it's got the staying power. I don't think... It's too expensive. The energy's too expensive, and it's just demanding too many cards from your deck. Also in fire we have Blaziken, who's got 2 interesting attacks, but again, we're talking about a stage 2 Pokemon, and they're not great at the moment except as support. It is still big EXs and stage 1 Pokemon that are ruling the format. Think of things like Raichu and Pyroar, and then you've got Yveltal and Plasmadex and all that kind of stuff. But both its attacks are very interesting. For 2 fire and a double colourless, Burning Shoot, discard 2 energy attached to this Pokemon, so you could discard the double colourless and attach it next turn. Choose one of your opponent's Pokemon and do 150 to that Pokemon. That's pretty good, and it goes back to Pokemon's obsession with 150, which was a real pain in the neck before they released Muscle Band and allowed you to do 170. But the problem is here, if you're doing 150 to the bench, that's not going to KO an EX. Being able to snipe an EX and kill with a non-EX Pokemon could potentially be good, but again, I mean, I suppose you could run this with DCE and Blacksmith. But, you know, you've got Delphox and Emboar in fire, and it's not even really the energy which is becoming a problem here, it's the amount of cards you're going to have to run. So you could run this with DCE and Blacksmith, and you could get it going in a turn, and you can snipe any non-EX Pokemon. but I worry that you're not one-hit KOing EXs, you're piling 4 energy on and leaving yourself vulnerable. And if you're putting 4 energy on an EX, if you're putting 4 energy on a stage 2 Pokemon and not getting a KO from it, that gets very expensive very quickly. Now, another Pokemon that initially looks too expensive is Poliwrath, moving into the water Pokemon. And this has a nifty little attack, which for 3 colourless energy does 60 damage and 30 damage to a benched Pokemon of your opponents. It's got a second attack which isn't any good. But it's on a stage 2 water, it looks expensive, that's not really going to work. Until you read Politoed, which is another stage 2 which evolves from Poliwhirl in the same way Poliwrath does. And this has an ability, King's Song. As long as this Pokemon is in play, ignore all colourless energy requirements in the attack costs of your Poliwag, Poliwhirl and Poliwrath's attacks. Now we go back and read it again and it looks a lot better. Poliwrath, no energy, 60 damage, 30 to the bench. Now we're cooking. Yveltal is going to, well, it's not going to struggle to KO it, but it's certainly going to be far more difficult for it to get the KO when you've got no energy sitting on that bad boy. We've also got Poliwhirl, which for no energy can do 50 damage, or 50 more if the opponent's Pokemon already has damage counters on it. And Poliwag, for no energy, can do 20 damage, plus confusion, and your opponent's Pokemon can't retreat the following turn. Now we're starting to get cooking. Now all these Pokemon have grass weakness, which starts to look pretty bad when Virgin is still running around, and trying to get 2 stage 2s out is quite costly, but you could actually run an energyless deck here. Now I know people did that with Snorlax with Laser, but it's really the first energyless attacking deck since Gyarados. Now it's not as good as Gyarados. We don't have the support cards like Uxie or Roseanne's Research and stuff we had back when Gyarados was out, and Felicity's Drawing and stuff like that, but it has the potential to be a nice little rogue deck. My inkling is it's going to be a little bit more like round than anything else, in the cool little mechanic, not good enough to compete with the big boys, but I still think it's a fun little deck that people are going to build and try out at League. I like it, but I don't know if it's really, well, in fact I do know, it's just not good enough to hang with the big boys we've got in the format at the moment. And that brings me to what I would consider to be the best card in the entire set, and that is Seismitoad EX, which at first glance has the potential to be a little bit too good, but we'll see. Seismitoad EX has an attack for a double colourless energy that reads like this. Goo Punch, 30 damage. During your opponent's next turn, they cannot play item cards from their hand. Trainer Lock in an attack, and bearing in mind this is a basic Pokemon which attacks for 1 energy attachment. What that means is no Enhanced Hammer to get rid of your DCE. You can play Seismitoad with Garbodor, and they cannot play a Tool Scrapper or Startling Megaphone to get rid of the tool. They would have to gust it up and kill it. No Laser. No, and you're keeping the energy, you're not getting lasered, your opponent can't attach a Muscle Band to do more damage, or a Silver Bangle to do more damage, and not only that, but you can even play it with Garbodor and they can't get rid of your Garbodor. That, or at least they can't get rid of the tool. They can, of course, Lissand or Red Signal it up. No, they can't Red Signal it up, that's an ability. And I suppose they could if you didn't have a tool on it. But the point is, you're not, so many things that are safe here. And not only that, it's going to stop your opponent setting up. A lot of people are using things like bicycle and roller skates at the moment. That's going to have to take a backseat. You can still play supporters, but you can't use your balls to search for Pokemon. There goes that. You can't use your trainer draw, your random receiver. You can't be attaching tools. I could go on. There's no point. Recently, we've seen Trainer Lock in abilities with Gothitelle and with Trevenant. This has the ability to do Item Lock, Trainer Lock, whatever you want to call it, with Ability Lock, which is quite frankly crazy. And I suppose I shouldn't be giving away my secrets here, but if you hadn't already looked at Seismitoad and thought, I'm playing that with Garbodor, then quite honestly, you probably were going to pick it up sooner or later, or you haven't looked hard enough, because that's the obvious combo here. This reminds me very much of Dialga G from the old SP format, which had a similar kind of thing going. Now, this isn't massively overpowered for one reason: Virizion Genesect. Virizion has a water resistance, Seismitoad has a grass weakness, and also Virizion Genesect really just needs a Sky Arrow Bridge, which you can play on the train a lot because it's not an item, it's a stadium, and energy. So, to be honest, if you can get a Virizion out turn 1, which you'll probably be able to, then all you need to do is manually attach twice. If you can't get a Muscle Band onto Virizion, you're doing 102 hit KOing Seismitoad quite easily. And they're doing 10 damage, which raises to a whopping 30 damage if they put a Muscle Band on. And let's not forget you're immune to lasers, so that means that, you know, at best they're 6 hit KOing you, and you're 2 hit KOing them, while you attach energy to, hopefully, Bench Genesect, which will 1 hit KO Seismitoad without a G booster. So Seismitoad does get my bet for being best card in the set, and it will be well played and well represented at tournaments. What I will say, however, is that this is not some kind of all-encompassing mega fantastic force, because at the end of the day, we still know that there is Virizion Genesect in the format, and this has no Virizion Genesect game. What fire Pokemon are you going to put with this? Maybe something like Pyroar, but there goes your Garbodor idea. We don't have a lot of techable fire Pokemon that we can just chuck in, and that's really going to save it here. Now, of course, you could just play it with a fire Pokemon and fire energy, because colourless energy is enough to do Goo Punch. But then I wonder whether you're going to be good enough against other decks in the format, because there are going to be some decks that, without drawing trainers, are able to draw what they need, and then you might be in trouble. It's still going to be a monster of a deck, and somebody, hopefully me, maybe somebody else, probably someone else, is going to come up with an amazing Seismitoad list, which is crazy good. Now, in case its first attack wasn't good enough, Grenade Hammer, water colourless, 130 damage, 30 damage to 2 of your benched Pokemon. Yeah, that's a pain in the neck, but you can play Mime unless you're playing Garbodor. To be honest, it's not the end of the world. You stick a Muscle Band on that, that's 150. You play Laser Verbank, that's 180. Not only have you got Trainer Lock and Ability Lock, but as early as turn 3 you can be 1 hit KOing EXs. That, my friends, is awesome. Now, there is a new Beartic in the set, and truth be told, it's not particularly great. It's got an attack for a double colourless energy that does 20 damage times the number of energy in the opponent's active Pokemon's retreat cost, which can be good against some high retreat Pokemon. Something like a Landorus, which I think has got a retreat cost of 3, means it's going to be doing 60 damage, double to 120, or indeed 160 with a Muscle Band. But, I mean, even so, it's just not great, to be honest with you. And there's plenty of Pokemon out there that have 3 retreat or 1 retreat, and it's not doing much good to them. There's also a Chloritzer, which has an attack for 1 water energy that does 30 damage, and allows you to switch this Pokemon with one of your benched Pokemon. It's not great, but potentially has Splash ability as a Pyroar counter. Would do 60 damage to Pyroar, would do 100 with a Muscle Band, or get the KO with a Muscle Band and a Laser. No need for Verbank. And it would switch to the bench, so you could put up something like a Snorlax to block, or a Latias, which is impervious to Pyroar, or something like that. I don't think it's amazing, but if you're looking for a cheap Pyroar counter, and you're playing Prism, but you're playing Rainbow, or Blend with Water, or just Water Energy, you could do worse than Chloritzer. But you really need Muscle Band and Laser to make the most of it. Now, there is a very interesting fossil Pokemon in the water, and that is Aurorus. Now, its attack for 4 energy does 70 damage plus automatic sleep. That is incredibly expensive. But it's got an ability. As long as this Pokemon is in play, all of your water-type Pokemon that have any water energy attached to them take 20 less damage from your opponent's Pokemon's attacks. Very specific, they've got to be a water Pokemon and they've got to have water energy attached to them. But this seems to stack. So you get 4 Auroras out, and your Pokemon is taking 80 less damage. Imagine having a Seismitoad active, which is taking 80 less damage from each attack while you're under Trainer Lock. You wouldn't be able to play Garbodor, of course, but, you know, there's potential there. And there is even a supporter card which makes fossil Pokemon easier to get out in this set. We'll get to that in a little bit. Moving into Lightning, we see Electivire. Now this is the counterpoint to the Magmortar I told you about earlier. And it's got, again, really cool artwork with a Magmortar backing him up. And it's kind of cool. The first attack for a Lightning Energy does 20 damage and then 20 more damage times the number of energy attached to your Magmortar. Now, if this was for a colour that's not a Lightning, you'd have a potential of a deck here. Just chuck in Magmortar and Electivire. By the way, earlier I said that you needed a basic on the bench. Electivire is, of course, a stage 1, so you need a stage 1 attacking and a stage 1 on the bench. Sorry, bit of a brain fart. As you can hear from my voice, I'm not 100% today, so do bear with me. But it's not colourless, it's Lightning. I don't foresee a deck where you're going to be able to get Magmortar and Electivire going nicely enough. You'll need Fire, and you'll need Lightning, and you'll probably need either DC Blacksmith, or you'll need an Emboar. I see people making this deck and playing around with it, but it's more of a fun league deck, kind of like Poliwrath, Politoed, than a deck which we're really going to be able to take seriously. Now, there is another Plusle and Minim, both of which are kind of weird because they're kind of doing what trainers already do in attack form. Plusle allows you to discard a basic energy and draw 2 cards. That's Fiery Torch in an attack. Minim allows you to choose 2 basic energy from your discard pile and put them in your hand. That's Energy Retrieval in an attack. Both times I'd rather just be using the trainer. I don't want to waste my attack on that, especially on really low HP Pokemon. And they're weak to fighting, which, as we've talked about, is going to see a resurgence. Lightning is quite well represented in the set. We also have a Deden, which has Call for Family. Search for 2 basic Pokemon, put them on your bench. Call for Family attacks aren't seeing a lot of play at the moment with the way the format is, but let's face it, Deden is going to be in the format, as is the rest of Rising Fist, for at least a couple of years. And it's nice to have a Call for Family Pokemon that we can call on. It's got 1 retreat, which isn't as good as 0 retreat, but it means you attach, Call for Family, and you've got the energy there ready to retreat. It's not going to be game breaking, but it's nice to have it in the format. And the last electric Pokemon I want to mention briefly is Thundurus, and it's the same kind of deal of looks kind of cool, but it's not really good enough to see any play. For a Lightning and a Colourless, you can do 30 or 60 damage if your opponent has a Pokemon tool attached to it. But even if I'm playing against the Evil Towel that's got a Muscle Band on, I'm still, and I've got a Muscle Band on myself, I'm still only doing 160, and that's with 2 energy on. It's not good enough. Now, moving into Psychic, there's not a huge amount, but there are a few abilities which are interesting here. And a couple of attacks as well. So we got a Hypno, which is one of the most interesting attacks we've seen for quite some time in the game. It's got an ability which reads like this. Look at your opponent's hand. You may choose 1 supporter card there. If you do, your opponent uses that supporter card. However, that supporter cards, target cards, and Pokemon are selected by the player who used this attack. I.e., you use the attack and your opponent has got a Cassius in their hand. You can make them pick up their main attack with all the energy attached. You look and there is a Lysandre, you can make them play the Lysandre and basically make it work as a switch. Put up a Pokemon you don't want them to hit. Although that's obviously not very good in an attack. Now we're seeing a lot more supporters nowadays which aren't draw. So you could do something like a Blacksmith attaching the only 2 fire energy in their discard to some rubbishy bench Pokemon who doesn't need it, and then the Blacksmith gets discarded. That would be quite fun to do. And let's not forget, of course, we've got the old favourites. Now, those who have been playing a couple of years will remember Smeargle. Smeargle had, well, what is an ability now, Poker Power back then, Portrait, where you looked at your opponent's hand and you had to use a supporter they had there. and you'd end up junipering stuff you wanted, or ending yourself to a small hand, or something like that. And you could do that here. You could make them discard their entire hand full of good stuff. You could end them to 1 late game. But at the end of the day, it's a stage 1 Pokemon, and it's an attack, and using this attack mid-game, making room in your deck for stage 1 Pokemons to do so, it's just not really very cost effective. I can't really see people doing it. So, I love this card, I just don't see it seeing play. Having said that, it's bound to pop up in a rogue deck sooner or later. Another card, which is kind of interesting but not quite good enough, is Jinx. This has an ability Victory Kiss, and basically your active Pokemon recovers 10 damage. Put 4 on your bench, your active Pokemon recovers 40 damage. Now, it's only your turn, it's not between turns like something like Superior is, and it's basically going to take up a lot of bench space very quickly, and I'm not entirely convinced it's good enough to warrant it. Like the idea, don't like the execution. Another ability which I kind of like the look of, but I don't think it's quite good enough, is Gothitelle. Teleport Room. Once during your turn, you may discard a stadium in play, and if you do, you search your discard pile for a stadium and put it into play. Not your deck, your discard pile. So there's got to be a stadium which your opponent has already knocked out. I love the idea that you can get a stage 2, and if your opponent knocks out your stadium, you can just get it straight back and knock out their stadium. But at the end of the day, this just isn't going to be good enough. It's a stage 2. It's room in your deck, it's bench space. And I know I'm saying this about a lot of cards in this set, and I've said it about a lot of cards in sets before, and it's quite depressing really, but the fact of the matter is, it's just not good enough. It's taking up too much space on your bench and in your deck. Sorry, I just don't buy it. And that's a little bit sad, but what can you do? And finally in Psychic, we see Golurk. Now Golurk, it's got a history of fun little attacks. It had the attack before it does 60 damage and you get rid of the top evolution. This one, it does 60 damage. If there's a stadium in play, it does 120 damage and discards the stadium. Now, in the modern games of Pokemon, there is almost always a stadium in play. So, that's kind of cool. 120 damage for free energy, and you get to get rid of your opponent's stadium. But again, it's a stage 1, it's free energy. I don't see it being particularly great. So, now it's probably time to have a quick look at fighting Pokemon, and this is of course where the set gets, its name and its kind of hook from. Now, this has a great many cards, some of which I think are going to see play, some of which won't. What I will say is that it is overwhelmingly likely that we are going to start seeing a big emergence of fighting decks. They are going to see play. Maybe something like Seismitoad can keep them in check, because about half of them are weak to water. But even then, you've got things like the Lucario, which we're going to look at in a minute, which can end up doing, 30 damage plus extra damage for the special energy, which I've talked about before, and etc, etc. I mean, really, the damage is going to add up quite quickly, whereas the Seismitoad is going to be doing 30 damage. So, amongst all the other cards I've talked about that add damage, we have another one. We have a Machamp. And Machamp, it's got an attack which does 80 damage for free fighting, and any damage done by your opponent is reduced by 40 the following turn. But mostly here we're looking at the ability. As long as this Pokemon is in play, your active fighting Pokemon's attacks do 20 more damage. For Machamp, and I know that's a lot of resources and bench space, but for Machamp means an extra 80 damage. And that's on top of all the other stuff, which we'll talk about all at the end. That's pretty good. Now, there's a couple other ones I don't really want to go into in great detail. Hitmonlee can do 30 damage to the bench, but then so can Landorus, and he also hits the active. Moving on, there is a Breloom, which it does 20 damage, and it heals the same amount of damage it does. But of course, we've got all those extra cards for fighting, like Machamp and Strong Energy, and the Stadium, Muscle Band, etc. that allow you to add damage. So this could end up being a hell of a tank. If it didn't have 100 HP to start with, it's going to be one hit KO'd quite quickly. Now there's a Hariyama, which isn't any good, but I want to mention it just for its specificity, which is fantastic. because it reduces damage done by 30, but only from fire and water Pokemon. Not any others, which is just wonderfully specific. Now, there's Lucario EX, and as this is going to end up being a long podcast, I'm not feeling particularly great. I'm going to gloss over this, go to my previous podcast if you want to hear about it. But essentially, first attack, 30 damage for 1 energy, very good. Second attack, 60 damage for 2, and you get to draw till 6 cards, brilliant. And its third attack, 100 damage, you're probably one-hit KOing EXs with that, with all the extra stuff, but you're probably not going to want to put free energy on it. In terms of Mega Lucario EX, 1 attack, 140 damage. You are going to be one-hit KOing unless you really can't get any extra stuff in play. But to be honest, you don't need that. Lucario does as much damage as you need. However, Mega Lucario will work as a Pyroar counter because it's an evolution. And if you want to play all basic cards in your fighting deck, which a lot of people are going to want to, when you build in things like Landorus EX and all the other ones I'm talking about here, it gives you an answer to Pyroar. Now, Mine Shao is interesting. For a single fighting energy, you do 40 damage and return the Pokemon and all cards attached to it to your hand. Now, that's kind of funky, because you can stick up a damage sponge like one of the dragons, or a Snorlax, or something like that, or a Latias. And then just, keep doing 40 damage. But of course, you can attach a strong energy and a muscle band, and doing 80 damage, and then stick it back to your hand, have another Mind Fu ready to go, and then just end up, completely switching them round. Because of course, when I get the Mind Shao in my hand, then as long as I've got a Mind Fu on the bench, and I'm probably pronouncing them terribly, sorry, next turn I can evolve it, Muscle Band, Strong Energy, 80 damage back to my hand, and then next turn I can put the Mind Fu down and evolve one on the bench. So as long as you've always got one on the bench, your next turn, unless your end, which is quite likely in today's modern format, but unless your end, you're going to be able to get another basic down and evolve to the stage 1 with a Strong Energy and a Muscle Band in one turn, and then stick up a damage sponge. So you can do a nice 80 damage per turn, but making sure that your opponent is only ever knocking out things like Latias, Snorlax, even putting up things like Sigilif. I can see this being a rogue deck. We see kind of hit and run attackers like Palkia. The advantage this has is your opponent can't knock out your attacker. Nor, I suppose, they can capture and kill their Mind Fu on your bench, but But they're not going to be able to megaphone off your Muscle Band or enhance Tamiya's Strong Energy. So I really like this card. I don't know if anyone's going to make it that good, but I really like the potential it's got here. Do 80 damage, stick up a Sigilif, your opponent can't touch it. Do 80 damage, stick up a Snorlax, your opponent can't retreat, etc, etc. There's the base of a deck right there. We've also got Landorus, and this is a really good card. 20 damage for 1 energy, fighting energy of course. Yeah, it's not great, but you can add lots of energy to it. But it ends up doing a lot more than 20 damage. 20 damage itself isn't great, but you get to attach a basic energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon, and that is really good. Now, truth be told, a lot of the fighting Pokemon I'm talking about here work with 1 energy. But there's things like Lucario, you wouldn't mind having free energy on to do 100 damage. Things like Landorus EX, you wouldn't mind having free energy on to do 150 damage, etc. So you don't need free energy, or any more than 1 energy on all these fighting Pokemon. But wouldn't you like the option? Landorus makes an excellent, excellent opener to any deck revolving around things like Lucario or Landorus EX, etc. And here we can really start to see how these fighting decks are shaping out. Mine Shao is good, but it's really going to be its own deck. Really, at the centre of the fighting deck, it really is going to be Landorus EX, and Lucario EX. They are going to be the ones you want to play with. Now, we've also got Tyrantrum, and I want to point this out. It's not good enough. It's too expensive. It's got the same, new little engine that Aurora's has got, but Aurora's has got an awesome ability. Tyrantrum is just bad. And then we've got Hawlucha. Now, I'm going to mention Hawlucha. I don't think it's good enough. I don't think it warrants a space in your deck over something like Landorus, Landorus EX, or Lucario EX, which really are the standard for fighting Pokemon. And I suppose you can put Machamp if you want, but honestly, between Landorus attaching energy and all the other ways we've got of adding damage, I don't think Machamp is going to earn its spot. Hawlucha has 70 HP and a weakness to lightning, which isn't great. But for a single fighting energy, it does 60 damage only to an EX. If your opponent's active Pokemon is not an EX, this attack does nothing. I like it, but not enough. Fighting weakness isn't huge at the moment. Now, this can kill Thundurus for 1 energy with a Muscle Band, but I'd rather have something like a Landorus going at it, quite frankly. And it's going to be very easily KO'd back by a Thundurus. The other thing it's going to kill easily is Darkrai, but Darkrai is becoming more and more irrelevant as Yveltal Garbodor becomes more and more relevant. Because, I mean, Darkrai, even when you weren't attacking with it, still had an awesome ability. If you're playing Garbodor to shut off its ability, it doesn't have a huge amount anymore. So I like Hawlucha, it's kind of cool, but I just don't see it being good enough to force its way into the deck. So there's the fighting Pokemon. At the end of the day, the only one that I haven't talked about before that's really going to start earning its stripes is going to be the non-EX Landorus. Moving into Dark, we've got a Drapion, which for a Dark Energy can do 20 damage, or 60 if it's poisoned. It's a Stage 1 Dark Pokemon, it's not good enough. Absol is a non-EX Pokemon, which is better than this. Both the Zoroarks, the Brutal Bash, and the Foul Play one are better than this. Don't play this Drapion. Looks good, not good enough. And that's the only Dark Pokemon I like in the set. Sorry. Moving into Fairy, it's not much better. There's a Clefable that's got an attack for a colourless energy, Stage 1 Pokemon. Choose one of your opponent's bench Pokemon and twitch it with his or her active Pokemon. It's a Lassonde in an attack, it's kind of cool. It's not as good as Carnivine, but Carnivine's going to be rotated sooner or later. It will see some fringe play in some decks, I have no doubt, before the time it's rotated. The other Pokemon I like in Fairy is Klefki. Now, I don't like Klefki, it's ridiculous as a Pokemon. And I speak as someone who doesn't really have a problem with Klinklang and Vanillux. It's a friggin' set of keys, it's ridiculous. But it's got a cool little ability. As long as this Pokemon is in play, your Fairy Pokemon's resistance is minus 40 instead of minus 20. Now, this is not going to have a huge amount of application, but it's going to be good for anyone playing Fairy decks with Aromatisse to help against Yveltal. It's not going to do a huge amount, they're just going to need 1 more energy on their active to kill you. But doing 40 less damage and putting an Eviolite on to do 60 less damage, it's going to make it harder for Yveltal. Not great, but it's kind of cool. Now, moving into Dragon Pokemon. There's only 3 Dragon Pokemon in the set I like the look of. And all of them I'm so desperate to like, but I just don't know if I can. Starting off, Dragonite EX. Now, 2 things to say about this. Dragonite's awesome, the artwork's cool. I want me one of these cards. Second thing to say about it, its ability is amazing. It's like the old Machamp Prime ability. When you play this Pokemon to your bench, you may select any number of basic energy cards attached to your Pokemon and attach them to this Pokemon. Then, if energy were attached in that way, switch this Pokemon with your active Pokemon. It's kind of cool. Now, I've seen 2 different interpretations, translations of this card. On Pokebeach, it reads Basic Energy. On Bulbapedia, it reads Energy, and that makes a huge difference. If it reads Basic Energy, this is going to see no play. Its attack for a Grass Lightning does 80 damage. If you discard an energy, it does 120 damage. No one's playing basic Grass and Lightning in any deck. It's just not happening. If it was Grass colourless, you could kind of see it working, potentially, as a little bit of a random tech in a Virizion Genesect deck, as a Dragon Pokemon, you know, and to kind of get grass energy off of things like a Virizion EX if you can't hit your energy switch. But if it's with grass lightning, with basic energy, it's not going to work. If, however, it says energy, well then I can see it working. Because there's plenty of decks that play rainbow and prism energy. And these work very nicely. You could play a Dragonite into a plasma deck. And you could then use it, if you've got a bunch of energies switched around your Pokemon and nothing to do with said energy, you can stick down a Dragonite and you can get a 320 damage using that energy, which previously was just not doing you any good. You've got a plasma energy on your Genesect EX. You can pop it onto Dragonite, grab a couple others, you're doing 120 damage. If you've got one energy on your Thundurus from your early game Raiden Knuckle, and you've got one plasma energy on your Genesect from mid-game Red Signal, that energy isn't really doing anything. What Dragonite would allow you to do is basically play it down, stick it straight into the active, and move those two useless energy with one other or just attaching from your hand, and then getting 80 or 120 damage right off the bat. That has the potential to be a really useful card, which can really come out of nowhere and do some good. So Dragonite really comes down to the translation. If it reads basic energy, I don't know what deck is going to want to play Grass and Lightning to do just 120 damage. If it's any energy, I love the idea of taking this into something like Plasma, or maybe an Aromatisse deck that plays Prism and Rainbow Energy, but doesn't have an Aromatisse in play for whatever reason, and using this. So Dragonite, watch this space, ladies and gentlemen. It could be awesome. Now, moving on, we've got a Flygon, which for 1 energy does Rainbow Shower. Choose any number of basic energy cards from your hand and attach them to your Pokemon in any way that you like. Because it's from your hand, it's a bit of a pain. You can use Professor's Letter with this, and that could be kind of cool. But if you don't have the energy in your hand, it's going to be a bit of a pain in the neck. I was one of those people that tried for a long time to get Terrakion EX working, and it never really proved to be quite good enough, because you didn't always have the energy in your hand. Now, this is clearly intended to kind of help us with Dragon Pokemon, which always have, like I've just said with Dragonite, really awkward energy requirements, but at the end of the day, it's just not... I just don't see when you're going to use this, when you're going to want to get a Stage 2 active and have all the basic energy in your hand ready to use. I really want to like it. I just don't see where the like is coming from. And finally, Noivern. Now, I had a really weird dream the other day, where I turned up to a Pokemon event, and I didn't have a deck. And my friend Tommy Roberts, and I don't know why I'm dreaming about Tommy, but I was. You're in my dreams, Tommy. I don't know if he's listening to this, but if you're listening to this, Tommy, you're in my dreams, man. And he lent me a Mewtwo Noivern deck. So I went back and read Noivern again, and I kind of like it. For the record, I'm not going to play Mewtwo Noivern at any tournaments in the near future, but it's got a really nice ability, Echo Illusion. When this Pokemon would be damaged by an attack, flip a coin. If heads, prevent all damage. That means your opponent's only hitting you 50% of the time. Downside, Dark, Psychic, Colourless, 30 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon. How are you going to get a Dark, Psychic and Colourless energy onto this Pokemon? And please don't tell me Flygon. With an easier to meet energy requirement, 30 spread, and immunity half the time could be good enough. But with 100 HP and a really awkward energy attachment, I just don't see it working. Sorry. Now, the last Pokemon I want to talk about before I get on to some special ones is the only colourless Pokemon I like the look of, and that is Tornadus. It's essentially 20 damage, and you switch the opponent's active Pokemon with one of his or her benched, but they switch which one to choose. So 20 damage for a double colourless, and they switch their benched. I don't like it. It's not quite good enough. Kind of cool, but it's not going to set the world on fire. Now, before we move on to finish with the trainers, there is just one other little thing I want to point out here, and that is Eevee. Now, Eevee has an amazing, and I know I didn't put this Pokemon before because I wanted to give them their own little segment. Eevee has, firstly, cute as anything artwork. Secondly, an amazing ability that reads like this. This ability can be used once during your turn, when you attach a basic energy from your hand to this Pokemon. Search your deck for one Pokemon card that evolves from this Pokemon and is the same type as the attached energy, and play it on this Pokemon to evolve it. Now, we'll have to wait for an official ruling, but that sounds to me like you can do that turn 1. Now, if that properly counts as evolving in the regular way, then you won't be able to. We will have to wait and see. But bearing in mind, we've already seen Caterpie and Kakuna, not Kakuna, Metapod, which allow you to evolve turn 1. This looks like more turn 1 evolution. Now, the only one that really springs to mind is the Leafeon we've already got, the one that I was playing for a lot of last season, which does 20 times the amount of damage, 20 damage times the amount of energy your opponent has in play, attached to all of their Pokemon. But there are 3 evolutions I should say, in this set, which can take advantage of Eevee. So one thing you can do is attach a water energy and evolve into Glaceon. And that allows you, for that one water energy, to do 30 damage plus 10 to each of the opponent's bench Pokemon. Kinda cool, but for a turn 1 attack, that's pretty good going. Now, if you instead choose a Fairy energy, you can get Sylveon, and for your 1 energy, you can do 30 damage, and just like the old Ambipom G, and this is lovely, choose 1 energy card attached to the opponent's active Pokemon, and move it to one of his or her benched Pokemon. That's cool. That's really cool. Because essentially what you do is just move all their energy to their bench Pokemon that don't need energy on. You're playing against Plasma, start moving the energy to their Deoxys or Genesect, so they're not going to be able to attack with it. You're playing against Darkrai deck, start moving the energy onto a Sableye or something like that that isn't going to need it. It's a fun little attack. Now, there's a lot of decks in this format which attack for just 1 energy, or have energy acceleration, and that means that Sylveon against those decks is going to be less useful. But let's not forget, ladies and gentlemen, that they're going to have to draw their energy in order to keep attaching. And you can do this from turn 1. And finally, Leafeon, 30 damage plus sleep for that single grass energy. So essentially, you start off with Eevee on turn 1, and you attach an energy to evolve it, and then you get to, do a half-decent attack on turn 1. It also means you're not sitting there with 50 HP Eevee. Now, if this is interpreted as meaning that it has to be down for a turn to use the ability, it's going to instantly get a heck of a lot worse. But as it looks at the moment, this looks kind of cool. I like it. So, that is all the Pokemon. I know this is taking a long time, but let's not forget, this is a new set. I am trying to give you my full and unabridged look at the set. Feel free to take a break as you're listening to this, but I would recommend listening to all of it, because I'm giving you the inside track on the entire set. I could just give you half the set, but then I wouldn't be doing my job properly now, would I? And I don't want this to run into the 100th podcast. So, let's look through the supporters and trainers quickly, and I'll be as quick as I can here. First things first, we have Jaw and Sail Fossil. They're exactly the same as the previous fossils. Look at the bottom 7 cards, and if one of them is either a Tyrant or an Amora, depending on which one it is, you get to put it onto your bench. There's a better way. Now there is Tool Stripper, which allows you to get 2 Pokemon tools attached to your Pokemon and return them to your hand. Could be useful to get rid of an escape rope, to get rid of something like a float stone and put on a muscle band, or get a muscle band off Genesect and put on a G booster. I don't think this has enough application to make it worth playing. I'm actually a fan of Tool Scrapper over the Megaphone, because sometimes I want to switch around the tool on my Pokemon. Now I know that this allows me to switch around the tool on my Pokemon without discarding it, but to be honest, ladies and gentlemen, I'd rather just play Tool Scrapper. Now maintenance initially looks bad. Shuffle 2 cards from your hand back into your deck and draw 1 card. Now as a draw card, this is pretty poor. It allows you to draw 1 card, and you've got to shuffle 2 back into your deck. But where this really shines is pre-Juniper. How many times have you Junipered stuff you really wanted to keep? I have, and I'm sure you have. What this allows you to do is shuffle things like a double colourless energy or other supporters into your deck and then Juniper, so you've got those cards ready. You can save your Scramble Switch or Computer Search for when you really need it. The other thing this works with is it combos nicely with Bicycle. Now how much room you're going to have in your deck to actually, play 4 Bicycle and 4 of these, I don't know. But it basically decreases your hand size by 1, making your Bicycle a little bit better. I like it, but it's a little bit weak. There is Radiant Gown, which is a Pokemon tool which blocks out all special conditions, just like Virizion or Slurpluff, but in a Pokemon tool. And that's kind of cool. Now, is it good enough to beat out Floatstone and Muscle Band, which are the undisputed kings of tools? I don't know. But it is really good if something like Excelgor ever tries to make a comeback. In fact, if any deck that revolves around special conditions starts coming out, this is going to be really, really good. Now, I don't think this is going to see a lot of play initially. I think it blocks Laser, but it's not the end of the world. I'd rather have Muscle Band. What this is going to do, however, is kind of block special condition decks from coming around. Because if ever a special conditions deck, like Excelgor, ever starts to become popular again, boom, Radiant Gown. Now, of course, they can use Trevenant to block my trainers, but all I need to do is play a Lysand, and then I can play all of these down. So, it kind of stifles creativity a little bit, but it's only going to see play if special conditions become more relevant than they are at the moment. Now, the last Pokemon tool I want to talk about today, because it's the last one in the set, is Focus Sash. This one I like. This could really rival Floatstone and Muscle Band. Now, I believe this was printed previously with a different name, and this just means you can't use the old card. Boo, Pokemon, boo! Let us use old cards, damn it. But what it basically does is, if you would be knocked out by damage, your Pokemon isn't knocked out, its HP becomes 10 instead. Then you discard Focus Sash, so it's single use. Soon as you get damaged, and you would be knocked out, your HP goes to 10, and you discard Focus Sash. Now it's damage. Poison gets around this. If you've got a Laser, then Laser will kill it every time, because what would happen is, your opponent would do any number of damage, and then Focus Sash would kick in, your HP would go to 10, then poison damage would be done between turns and you would die. So poison damage, if you would be knocked out, will just override Focus Sash anyway, not to mention that what people can do is get you down to that 10 damage, and then play something like an Escape Rope and kill you with a Landorus, Kyurem, Darkrai, etc., with residual bench damage. So it's not amazing, and I don't see it seeing a ridiculous amount of play, but certainly this is a Pokemon tool which is going to see some play. It's going to have its place in the meta. Whether it's going to beat out Muscle Bandit or Floatstone in the majority of decks, waits to be seen. But certainly, playing it on something like Garbodor, for if your opponent wants to Lysand it up and kill it, well, that could be better than Floatstone. Yeah, you'll have to switch or Escape Rope that Garbodor back again. Or, to be honest, you wouldn't even need to do that, because imagine it this way. You play a Garbodor, your opponent Lysands or catches it up to try and kill it. Maybe you're playing Seismitoad and they have to Lysand it. They then try and kill it, Focus Sash kicks in, 10 HP's remaining, I attach a Floatstone, retreat Garbodor, I keep the lock. So Focus Sash could be really good for Garbodor in that respect. Moving into the supporters and trainers, and then we are done. And this is a long podcast, but truth be told, I think it warrants being a longer podcast. If this podcast is too long, as always, tweet me at the Wassy or email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, and I'll cut it down in future, cut it into 2 halves. I think it warrants being this long. If you disagree, please let me know. We are close. Fossil Researcher. It's just like Pokemon Fan Club, but for Amora and Tyrunt. Search for them, put them on your bench. No mucking about with the Fossil Tower Majobber, where you got to have it in your hand and hit a heads. No mucking about with those stupid Fossil cards. Play them, search your deck, put them on your bench, sorted. This could make... Well, Tyrunt's a bit rubbish, to be honest. But this could make Amora playable, and it could bring its ability into the fore. They've been experimenting with ways to make Fossil Pokemon playable for a while now. None of them have worked. This is the best one they have come up with. Even better than the ones where you discard it and then put it on the bottom of the deck and then use a Fossil to bring it out. Because you had to get them in your discard pile, and then you had to not be under Garbodor lock, and then you had to draw the Fossil. With this, draw it, put it on your bench, wait to evolve. Corinna is the one which allows you to search for a fighting Pokemon and an item card. And I've talked about this at length before. It's like Skylar, but you also get a fighting Pokemon. If you're playing a fighting deck, you're going to want this. You can even use it to grab something like a random receiver or computer search and stream supporters. Battle Reporter is another draw supporter that allows you to draw until you have the same number of cards in your hand as your opponent. For the love of God, don't play this card. Now, if my opponent ends me to 1 when he's got 6 in his hand, this will be awesome. But not as awesome as Juniper, or Colrus, or even Shauna. It's too weak, it's too unpredictable, and if my opponent knows that I play Battle Reporter, they can try and make sure that they go into my turn with as low a hand as possible. And if my opponent has less cards in their hand than me, this does nothing. Don't play Battle Reporter, it's rubbish. Now there are 3 stadiums in this set. There's Fighting Stadium, which I've talked about before. Does 20 more damage from a fighting Pokemon to an EX. That's pretty good. Combine that with Strong Energy, which does 20 more damage, Muscle Band, which does 20 more damage, Machamp, which does 20 more damage, and this damage is adding up pretty gosh darn quickly. Now remember, it only does extra damage to EXs, but we're in an EX heavy format. And if it's not an EX, they've got lower HP anyway. There's also Mountain Ring, which is basically like Mr. Mime in a stadium. Each benched Pokemon takes no damage from attacks, so you could play this in your Seismitoad list, so that its second attack doesn't do any great damage. You could play it to get around Kyurem or Landorus, and Landorus is, if it doesn't get rotated, going to become very, very popular indeed. Because it can essentially, if you put a Muscle Band on, and Fighting Stadium and Strong Energy, that's 60 damage to an EX, 70 to a non-EX, on turn 1 for a single energy and 30 bench damage. What I would say is, this leaves it out of your control. Your opponent can play a Counter Stadium and then do that bench damage. So it's not quite as good as Mr. Mime in that respect. But it doesn't take up a bench spot, and Garbodor doesn't shut it off, so could be quite good. The penultimate card here is Training Center, and along with things like Eevee, they are starting to trying to favour non-EX Pokemon. Training Center, all Stage 1 and Stage 2 Pokemon's maximum HP is increased by 30. Now this is dodgy, because if you're less than 30 HP away from being killed, and your opponent plays a Counter Stadium, you'll die straight away in the middle of their turn. We saw this with Aspertia City Gym, when people played it with Tornadus, etc. But this is still kind of funky, this is still kind of cool, and it's nice to see some support for Stage 1 and Stage 2 Pokemon. If you're playing a deck that revolves around Stage 1 and Stage 2 Pokemon, and you're not playing any other stadium instead, I could see this being chucked in just for funsies. And the final card, which I was not expecting, is Herb Energy. And in the same way that Strong Energy does 20 more damage if attached to a fighting Pokemon, and is discarded if it's non-fighting, Herb Energy heals 30 damage if you attach it to a grass Pokemon, and can only be attached to a grass Pokemon. Now, I don't know if this is going to see any play because most grass decks are Virizion Genesect and they want to be playing basic grass so that they are less susceptible to Enhanced Hammer and so that they can attach it using Emerald Slash. But playing a couple of these in Virizion Genesect to heal 30 damage could be a good shout. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Furious Fists. There are a lot of good cards in this set, and a lot of cards that have potential, and this is why the podcast has broken an hour for the first time in a while. As I've said, if it is too long, do let me know. Tweet me at the Wassy or email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, or if you're listening on YouTube, SoundCloud, etc., just leave a comment down below. But I pride myself in this podcast in giving you all the useful information, and what I didn't want to do was give you a cut-down podcast where I left a bunch of cards out. Now, I have got a little bit of a sore throat and headache today, so if I'm not sounding my usual chirpy self, that is the reason why. But I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. I love, and I mean love, doing these set review podcasts, because it forces me to look in great detail at the set, and I love having to have a look at all of these cards. It really makes me very, very happy indeed. If you've got anything to add, if you think I've missed anything, if you just want to ask me any questions, get in touch. I would love to hear from you about this set. And just as I leave, remember, subscribe on YouTube. Go watch my YouTube videos. Like YouTube videos. Tell other people. If you keep getting in touch and liking these videos, I will keep putting them in. And last, do not forget, any questions you have got, as long as they're vaguely relevant, every question I get asked, I will answer on next week's podcast. If there's too many, we'll roll them over into future ones. I know it's late notice. If I don't get many questions, I won't hold it against you. But if there's anything you want to know, ask me. It'll get done in next week's podcast. Until then, look after yourselves. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio.